Welcome, and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Tammy Hughes, and I'm here in the studio today with Dr. Pat Heim. And I'm going to ask Pat to tell us one of my favorite stories, and that is, how did you get into this sort of work?
Well, it was by accident. A long time ago, before I started this business, I was working in a big Fortune 500 company. I was in a very high-level meeting, and I don't remember why I was in this high-level meeting, because I wasn't high-level. And in this meeting, these two executives were just viciously attacking each other. And eventually the meeting was adjourned, thankfully, and we were walking out of the meeting, and those two guys were in front of me as we exited the room, and one turned to the other and said, "Want to get a beer?" And I was just totally dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that they would go out and get a beer after attacking each other like this. But clearly this made sense in their world. I lived in their world, and I had to figure out how this made sense to them. So I started reading all of the research on gender differences that I could get my hands on. And it just sort of snowballed from there, and that's how I got into this business.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today in this studio from training, meeting, and boardrooms all around the globe. My name is Tammy Hughes, and I'm with the Heim Group. We are workplace communication consultants specializing in the area of gender differences specific to the workplace. I'd like to take you today on a little journey into the different gender cultures and equip you with a new set of lenses to see the world with. Your gender diversity lenses. Most of us wear some sort of lenses, the ones we were born with. And I'd like to spend some time today giving you the ability to see the world through both sets of lenses. We know that the best leaders are those that understand how both genders work differently, so they can build teams where both strengths are encouraged and are contributing factors to high performance. Today I'll be talking about the research on gender differences, and I'll be painting those with stories from real life, some familiar stories. So some of the things I need to tell you about the research is, first of all, the research is not American. As of 16 years ago, all research that came out of the U.S., all research that did come out was out of the U.S. and Canada. But as of 16 years ago, Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen of Cambridge started doing gender research, and it has flown around the globe. I want you to know that I realize that this is just one dimension of diversity. There are many other ways we could look at differences today. This is just one of those. So we'll be isolating out all the other dimensions of diversity, generational, culture, so that we can focus on the lens of gender, because that's how the research comes to us. Anytime we learn anything new, we go through 4 phases. First phase we go through is awareness. That's where we simply see something new for the first time and we say, I've never seen anything quite like that before. The second phase that we go through is awkwardness. That's when we've started trying to use the new language, or we try to use the new appliance and we're not very proficient at it, and that is our awkward phase. Third phase we go through when we learn something new is the skill phase. That's when we become fairly proficient at doing something, but we still have to use a lot of cognitive energy to accomplish the task. The fourth phase we go through is habit. It's when we do something very proficiently and we use very little cognitive energy to do the task. Today, we are just going to do phase 1. I want you to sit back in your chairs and relax as we explore the different cultures and see if the world looks slightly different depending on the gender lens that you wear. We're just headed for an awareness journey today. One of my fundamental beliefs that I've grown to embrace over my 16-year career of deep diving into gender differences is that people do things because it makes sense to them. Did you get that? People do things because it makes sense to them. Sometimes we just don't know what makes sense to them. In fact, 99% of the time, I would say both men and women are trying to do the right thing. But we'll learn today that there can often be 2 different sets of rules about what right is. We're going to explore the different cultures in our time together today, and we'll talk a little bit about childhood research, because the research shows us that both men and women learn appropriate adult behavior through the lessons of childhood. So we're going to explore some of those lessons we learn in childhood as well. Men and women must work together at all levels of an organization. So what we're going to try to do today is see if we can understand the intention of the other gender. That's so we know what goes on in here, behind the eyeballs, so we can read messages more accurately, the way they were intended to be sent to us. Also, see if we can learn to shape our message in a way that it can best be heard. The most important thing I will say during our entire time together today is this. Our time together is not about goods or bads, and it's not about rights or wrongs. It's just about differences. An attorney came to us years ago and described one of the classic clashes between these two cultures when he threw his hands up in the air and he said, "Help me understand. I am an attorney with 15 years of experience. I give my assistant an assignment. She's fresh out of law school, 6 months, and she starts asking me questions. Who does she think she is?" Well, this is the classic clash between these two cultures. As he sees it, they're in a hierarchy. And in this particular situation, he's above her in the hierarchy, he's given her the ball, asked her to run with it, and she wants to talk it over. As she sees it, they're in a flat structure, and she believes it's her duty to ask questions in order to do the best possible job that she can. Both of them doing the right thing, but by two different sets of rules about what right is. If you're working with someone who's from a different culture and they do something that seems a bit strange, we're most likely to chalk it up to the fact that they're from another culture. But when we work with someone from the other gender culture and they do things that seem a bit strange, we put heavy, loaded language on it. Like we talk about how the person is belligerent and sensitive, or how the person is over-emotional, without realizing they may be doing what makes perfect sense given the culture that they come from. So think about, when do we start to treat boys and girls differently? There's research that looks at the first 24 hours of life, and they have found that there's a few pieces that fall dramatically by gender. This first one is a fun piece of research. It's called Pink and Blue Baby Blanket Research. It's where they study how babies are held, and they have found that babies that are put in pink blankets, or are known to be girl babies, are often held differently than babies that are put in blue blankets. My favorite of the infant research is when they try to study what babies are focusing on in the first 24 hours of life. And that falls dramatically by gender as well. Little girl babies. Little girl babies are most often looking for eyes and a mouth. They're looking for a face. Boy babies. Boy babies are most often looking for blinking lights and machinery. Now, do you think that that might translate into adult life? How many women tell me that they never get to hold the remote control at home? Sometimes it's easiest to see the rule differences in the games that children play. So here is what the research shows us on childhood toys. Toy companies from around the globe have participated in this sort of research for years. Here's how they run the research. They fill a big room with a wide variety of toys. Toys that would be considered typical girl toys, like dolls and house. Toys that would be considered typical boy toys, like trucks and soldiers. And then they fill the room with those non-gender specific toys as well. That would be everything from building blocks, Legos, bicycles, games, reading. They put boys in the room first, and they observe them through black glass. Black glass means they can watch what the boys are doing, but the boys have no idea they're being observed. In every culture around the globe for more than 50 years, boys have always migrated to the same three things: speed, power, and noise. Pull the boys out of the room and put the girls in the room with the same variety of toys. Girls have always migrated to the same two things: caring and relationship. Now, the toy that the boy picks up might be the same toy that the girl picks up, but it's what they do with the toy that the researchers are watching. Now, I want you to think with me about what we might call a little girl who tends to play with toys that boys might play with. Maybe she climbs trees and kicks the football outside. In most cultures around the globe, I hear the word tomboy. Tomboy. And what would we call a little boy who tends to play with toys that girls might play with? What would we call that boy? I hear four terms around the globe. I hear sissy, pansy, girly boy, and then doesn't work in the US but everywhere just fine, gay. Now, are any of those positive terms? I can't tell you how many times I will hear dads refer to their little daughter when she's climbing trees. "Oh, look at that little tomboy. She's so cute." But I have yet to hear a dad referring to his son, "Oh, look at my son. He's wearing his pink snowsuit and he's setting up a tea party. What a little sissy." They don't carry the same weight. Now, here's why I need to bring this up. Research shows us that the bands of acceptable behavior are very broad for women in childhood. Women can behave when they are young in girly ways, playing dolls and house, and then go outside and play rough with the boys, and then go back inside and play dolls and house, and it's all seen as perfectly acceptable. But those bands become much more narrow for men in childhood. And if men get outside of these bands, they'll earn a little title that's not fun to wear, like pansy, sissy, girly boy, or gay. Those bands flip later in life, according to the research. The bands become very broad for men in adult life, specifically when they start to lead others. Men can lead in a very aggressive way, and then an evolving way, and then an aggressive way, and then an evolving way. And it's all seen as perfectly acceptable. But those bands become much more narrow for women in adult life when they start to lead others. And if they get outside of these bands and demonstrate too much aggressiveness in their leadership, they'll earn a little title. And it's not a fun one to wear. It rhymes with witch. So both men and women experience what the research calls as broad bands of acceptable behavior and narrow bands of acceptable behavior. They're just at different times in life. And here's why I think it's important for me to bring this up. I often hear women say, "Tammy, it's not fair that I have to operate within narrower bands of being able to demonstrate leadership aggressiveness than my male peers can." And I always say, your male peers understand what that feels like because men experience narrow bands of acceptable behavior in childhood. So let's talk about what the research shows us are some of the key differences that boys and girls learn in childhood. The first big difference researchers found is that boys learn in most of the games they play growing up how to compete. It's me against you, it's us against them. And if you think about it, another word for the word competition is the word conflict. Boys learn to fundamentally relate with other boys through conflict. And if you think about most girls, girls are often told in childhood to get along, to be nice. These are often code words for do not get into any conflict. Another big rule difference that researchers have found is that boys spend 50% of their time playing games that are winning and losing. Girls play a lot of games where they look for a lot of win-win. One girl will say to another girl, how about if we play dolls? The other one will say, well, I would like to play nurse. Well, how about if you bring your sick baby to me? So girls play a lot of win-win games. Boys play a lot of win-lose games. But on average, boys learn a very important lesson, and that is boys spend 50% of their time losing. That is, they learn how to take a loss, learn from it, drop it, and move on. And if you think about it, there isn't an opportunity to practice losing in many of the games that girls play. Boys also learn another very important lesson, and that is to do what the coach says, period. The coach says it's 10 meters and right. The boy knows that it's 10 meters and right. In the workplace, she often thinks it's up for discussion because boys learn in childhood not to say, well, coach, I was kind of thinking left. What do you think about left? Boys learn when it's 10 and right, it's 10 and right. And women thinking it's up for discussion in the workplace is often quite baffling to men. Boys also learn another really important lesson, and that is to play with people they don't necessarily like. I want this kid on my team because he is the biggest, meanest, roughest, toughest kid around. I don't much care about his social skills. She, however, wants to play with someone who's nice. And if she's not nice, then she doesn't want to play with her. Boys also learn to mask, to not cry, and to take that one step further, and that is to mask emotion in general. I am really hurt that the coach has not picked me to play yet, but I would not display that on the outside because then I might look like a weak player. And if you think about it, there's no big risk in displaying emotion in the female culture. And then the last big and important difference that we find that boys and girls learn in childhood is that boys learn that when the game is over, the game is over. My agenda has been to destroy you this entire time. But now that the game is over, let's go have Cokes together. Let me take that to work between two women. Two women in a meeting, really disagreeing with each other's ideas. When they walk out of that meeting, is the game over? Many women tell me they have just had a lifetime experience. So some big differences that we learn, even in childhood, by studying boys and girls. I want to continue now with the hierarchy and the flat structure. And I want to paint that with a different story. Some years ago, our founder and CEO, Dr. Pat Heim, she was going to be speaking for a big convention. And they told her that when she arrived at the airport, they were going to send a limousine to the airport to pick her up. So she arrived at the airport, went down through to the baggage claim area, and sure enough, at the bottom of the escalator was a man limo driver dressed in a limo uniform, holding a placard that read, Dr. Heim. So she walked up to him and said, I'm the person that you're looking for. He said, are you Dr. Heim? She said, yes, I'm Dr. Heim. He took her out to the curb where he had a long, white stretched limousine waiting for her on the curb. He opened the back of the limo, showed her all the gadgets and gizmos and how to operate everything inside. And she sat in the back of the limousine for the 30 minutes that it took to get to the hotel. Next day, she finished speaking. She comes out from the hotel convention center and she sees the same long white stretched limousine waiting for her on the curb. Except a woman gets out of the driver's seat and she comes over and says, are you Pat? And Pat said, yes. And she said, now, do you want to sit in the back like a big shot or would you like to sit up front with me? Now, Dr. Pat Heim chose to sit up front with her because that's the culture that Pat comes from. And on the 30 minutes that it took to get Pat to the airport, they talked about their lives. She found about the limo driver's aspirations in life, and they became friends. Now, I want you to realize that both of these limo drivers were doing the right thing. As he saw it, they were in a hierarchy. And in this particular situation, Dr. Heim was above him in the hierarchy, and he behaved appropriately. As the female driver saw it, they were in a flat structure. And apart from getting Pat to the airport on time to catch her flight, the very next best thing that could happen is they could become friends on the way there. Both limo drivers doing the right thing, but by two different sets of rules about what right is. Now, let me give you a physical illustration of these differences. We've worked with a big medical organization over the years, and we do a breakout session for doctors so that they can better understand, male and female doctors can understand the communication differences between the two cultures. But every year that we've been there to deliver this, there has been a session that runs next door to us that we've kind of gotten familiar with. It's a session for new young doctors. Doctors just getting out of medical school and residency, an opportunity for them to come into a session with some older seasoned doctors to ask questions about how to practice care, how to set up a practice, and how to hire the right kind of people. Every year that we've been there, that session for new young doctors has physically, the room always been set up the same. They put a big 5-foot dais up here or platform, and the older seasoned doctors sit up here behind desks, and they answer questions from the new young doctors seated in rows out here. Well, last year, when getting to meet the people that were in the session next to us, we found out that that session for new young doctors was run for the first time by one of the female doctors. She asked for the room to be set up very differently. She asked for the room to be set up all on one level and in a big circle. And when the older seasoned doctors walked in the room and saw the room set up differently for the first time, they looked and said, "Why'd you set the room up so weird?" Now, this is a physical illustration of the hierarchy and the flat structure. And I want you to realize that it is not about which of these is good or bad, right or wrong. Hierarchy, flat structure. The problem is that we tend to see the world through mental structures that we don't know we have. And so when we see somebody do something different for the first time, we want to say, "What's wrong with you? And why'd you do it that way?" without realizing that there's different ways of seeing the world. Now, there's one other rule difference that we need to talk about, and it only exists in the female culture. It's in the flat structure. We call it the power, dead, even rule. And this is the expectation that women have of other women that the power will be kept flat or shared. Because what happens in some organizations is when a woman is bumped up and promoted, the first to try to bring her back down verbally and say, "You know how she got that promotion, don't you?" is typically not the men in the organization, it's the women. So let's talk a little bit about what drives some of that behavior. Man goes up to his female assistant and slaps a file on her desk and says, "I need this project by 3. He'll probably get it. Woman goes up to her female assistant, slaps a file on her desk and says, "I need this project by 3. She better start praying. Because what the woman expects of her is a little relationship work up front. "Hey, how are ya? How you been doing? Is your son feeling better? How was that soccer tournament this weekend? Hey, if you could fit this project in by 3, I'd really appreciate it." Now, that she has to do that relationship work up front isn't so much a problem. Here's how it can become a problem. There was a VP in a big company that was talking about someone who helps to head up R&D inside of his organization, who is a woman, and he said, "She is wonderful, but she wastes all this time talking to the women." So we asked him, "Do you get the output from her that you need?" First thing you have to do always is rule out productivity. Productivity is not a gender-specific problem. There are just as many unproductive women as there are unproductive men. So do you get the output from her that you need? And he said, "She's phenomenal. But you see, she'd be even more phenomenal if she'd stop talking to the women." Now, what he didn't realize, because he read it through the cues of his own gender lenses, was that if she didn't do some of that relationship work, she wouldn't get some of the output from the people that reported to her that made her so fabulous to him. So this is a classic example. When we look through the lens of our own gender, without understanding how both gender lenses work differently, we often can misread and misjudge the other gender. See, the differences become a problem because the rules are invisible as you move from culture to culture. So what we want to do is see if we can create some visibility to those rules, because at the end of the day, we want to be able to honor the other gender for the way that works for them, and not make them bad or wrong for not doing it the way that works for me. Now back to this flat structure, this power dead even rule. This is so pervasive in organizations, we find that it even overrides organizational structure. Women will often say of their female bosses, "Who does she think she is, trying to tell me what to do?" Well, she's the boss. She's supposed to be able to tell you what to do, but this seems to even override organizational structure. Often hear women in organizations all around the globe, in all sorts of industries, saying things like this: "We want to see women at those top positions. We want to see women promoted to those top positions." And then a woman will get promoted to one of those top positions. And you'll hear women say, "We don't want to see that woman in the top position, not that woman." And this is a classic example that inside the female culture, oftentimes what can happen is women can be very vicious towards other women who get promoted into some of those positions. So that is that power dead even rule. And there's one other piece of this that I want to explore as well, and that is, we know that when women are in some of these senior positions in really small numbers, we know that it can be very lonely territory. I was working for one of the biggest manufacturing companies on the planet, and I was doing a session with some very high-level executives one time. And the room was set up in a big U, and we had not talked about titles in our introductions. I didn't know who anybody was in the room. But I noticed subtly as we started our journey for the day that there was a woman in the back of the room who I would guess was particularly high level. Not from anything I was seeing her do, but from watching everybody else in the room. During our lunch break, we were sent to the corporate canteen to get lunch. So I walk through with my tray, put my food on my tray, and I head out into this sea of dining room tables, and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to have my lunch. And I noticed a woman sitting by herself, who was the woman who'd been in the back left corner of my room. So I went up to her and I said, "May I join you for lunch?" And she said, "That'd be great." So I sat down across from her, and we talked briefly about how we thought the session was going. We talked a little bit about our families. And then she leaned across the table to me and she said, "Since I was promoted to Executive Vice President 6 months ago, you're the first woman to have lunch with me." So I want you to realize that it can be lonely territory for women when they are in very small numbers at some of these higher level positions. And sometimes that's driven because of this rule inside the female culture, the power dead even rule. At the Heim Group, we are very committed to understanding the flip side opposite. So when we see something in the female culture, we try to figure out what does that look like in the male culture. And when we see something in the male culture, we try to figure out what does that look like in the female culture. So let me go back to my story about giving an assignment to somebody, and let me flip this, because this happens inside of companies all around the globe as well. Woman goes up to her male assistant and slaps a file on his desk and uses speech that would typically work with another woman. "Hey, how are ya? How you been doing? How was that football tournament this weekend? Is your son feeling better? Oh, great. If you could fit this project in by 3, I'd really appreciate it." Now, what the man typically hears is optional, optional. If it fits in, I do it, and if it doesn't fit in, I don't do it. And so she comes back at 3 o'clock and he hasn't had time to do the project, and she zaps him for it. And he says, "These women will drive you nuts. They say one thing, but they expect another thing. How are you supposed to figure them out?" And that's because what works in one gender culture will often backfire when you go across cultures. One of the most common things that I will hear a man ask, well-meaning question, is, Why is it that women have such poor self-esteem?
This is something that happens between women all the time. Oh, Tammy, I love that new suit.
This whole thing, I got it on sale.
Now, here's what's going on. Men live in hierarchies and women live in a flat culture. By me telling Tammy that I love her new suit, I have bumped her up in our relationship. This could be problematic. So Tammy needs to get this relationship flat again. By saying, oh, this old thing, I got it on sale, she has equalized our relationship and made it flat. This is a positive interaction between women, but it can sound to the male culture like it is a negative interaction or that Tammy has poor self-esteem. This is a good thing in the female culture.
So what men and women do makes perfect sense inside their culture. What happens sometimes is we look across cultures and things may not look like they make as much sense. And that's what we're going to spend our time today, trying to understand what makes sense in each gender culture. So let's explore the next big rule difference that we find in the male and female culture. This one shows up in all parts of life. We see this in professional arena, and this one spills into the personal arena as well. It's called the goal focus versus what's called the process focus. And I want to bring this home first, and then we'll bring it back to the workplace in just a little bit. It's the weekend, and she says to her significant other, I need to buy a new black skirt. Will you go shopping with me? Oh, he moans and groans and rolls his eyes, but he reluctantly agrees to go. They arrive to the shopping complex. He goes and finds the first women's clothing store, goes in, sorts for the skirt section, finds the color black, finds her size. Here it is. He has killed the black skirt. But she's not sure she wants that black skirt. She'd look around in several stores, maybe see if there's shoes to go along with it. And since this could take a little while, let's have lunch. He feels tricked. She said she wanted a black skirt, he killed the black skirt, and then she moved the goal line on him. Now let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. As he heard it, this was a goal-focused activity. Find black skirt, kill black skirt, go home, watch game. To her, this was intended to be a process-focused activity. Yeah, she needed a new black skirt, but she just wanted to spend some time talking about what's going on in the world. But our couple doesn't go, oh, goal focus versus process focus is getting our way. No, as he sees it, this woman tricks me every time we go shopping. As she sees it, this guy starts whining after he spends 5 minutes with me. Now it is Saturday night, and our couple has decided that they're going to go out for dinner. And she goes to him and she says, which shoes should I wear? And he says, wear those. And she says, don't you like these? He knew it was that old trick question. Now let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. As he heard it, this was a goal-focused activity. Kill a pair of shoes. But as she saw it, this was a process-focused activity. She was looking for a little shoe discussion. But our couple doesn't go, oh, goal focus versus process focus is getting in our way. No, as he sees it, I have been married to this woman for 20 years and never gotten one of these questions right. As she sees it, you ask the guy a simple question and he goes ballistic on you. I was being introduced a few months ago for a big HR session that was being done in Amsterdam. And in the introduction of my time, the woman who was introducing me talked about some research that had been done in the aerospace industry. They had gone back and studied a near catastrophic loss that had occurred in a project. And they had gone back and looked over meeting notes to figure out what caused the problem. They found that as an organization, they had become so goal-focused, running fast after the goal, that they had actually shut down the rich processing in their meetings. And in fact, in their meeting notes leading to that issue, they had the solution to what could have been catastrophic in 80% of their meetings. So here's the point when you think about goal and process. I work in some organizations that are so goal-focused, they are running fast and furious after not quite the best target. And I work in some organizations that are so process-focused, they never decide what the target is. The point here is that we need to create an organizational culture where both skills are valued, because any strength gone too far becomes our weakness. So we need to create a culture where we tap into those rich strengths that men and women bring of goal focus and process focused. Now let me talk about how the research comes to us, because what I want to be careful that you don't hear is that women are not goal focused. Here's how the research looks. Problem or event happens out here. What a man is more likely to do is to pull that right in here, sort through and process through options, and announce we should do X. What a woman is more likely to do. Problem or event happens out here. A woman is more likely to pull that right in here, sort through and process through options, and announce we should do X. Both men and women get to the goal in exactly the same way, but they do so in different places. And if you live in a hierarchy, sorting and processing internally makes all the sense in the world. If you live in a flat structure, sorting and processing externally makes all the sense in the world. So what the research shows us is that men are more likely to give you the bottom line when asked and then backfill in how they got there. Women are more likely to walk you through the process and then give you the bottom line. So both men and women get to the goal in exactly the same way, they just sort in different places. Now let's talk about the next big rule difference that falls very neatly under goal and process, and that is the linear and multiple.
We know from research that men tend to live their lives more in a linear kind of fashion, and women tend to live their lives in more of what's called a multiple fashion. Men are more comfortable living in what people sometimes call a box, their work box, and then pulling out and in their home box, and then in their soccer box. Women have all the same boxes, a home box, a work box, a soccer box. But the research calls it the thread of life that pulls all those boxes together. And so women are unable to live in one box. They're always all joined together. And so that men and women live their lives in different ways with linear and multiple, that doesn't cause any problems. But there can be some differences in the way that linear and multiple plays out in some very practical kinds of ways. And I wanted to ask Pat to tell us a story about a recent vacation that she had where she found linear and multiple played out in her life.
Well, actually, the problem started way back when we got married almost 30 years ago. Because back then, when we got married, I noticed that my husband had difficulty hearing me. Back when we got married, I would be saying something and my husband would say, huh? What? And it was so annoying back almost 30 years ago that I asked my husband to go get a hearing test. And my husband, he's so wonderful.
He's very nice.
He's very nice. Yeah, he actually went and got the test. And I made this little deal with myself when he got the test, that if the test came back normal, because I knew it wasn't going to come back normal, Tammy.
Right.
I made this little mental deal with myself that if it came back normal, I would shut up. Well, it came back normal. So I had kept my mouth shut all of these years. But when we went on vacation recently in his little rented car, I had a problem. Because I would say something like, isn't that an interesting building? And he would go, huh? What? Every time I said something, huh? What? And I was getting so annoyed that I was getting really, really steamed. Every time I spoke, huh, what? So I said to myself, hold on, before you blow up. I said to myself, you know a lot about this gender stuff. This is probably gender related. See if you can figure it out. And I said to myself, I figured out what was going on. When I would ask him a question, he had to unplug from driving and plug into me before he could answer the question. And that's what was causing the problem. He could either drive or he could hear the question and answer me. For him, it was linear. Drive or hear the question. He couldn't do both at the same time. And once I figured that out, my anger at him dissipated.
So the real key here is, as we've been saying, to honor the other gender for the way that works for them and not make them bad or wrong because they don't do it my way. But if we don't understand the differences, we can be very frustrated with the other gender. So another big way that we see goal and process play out is in the difference between men and women with giving the answer versus talking it over. We know from research that men are much more comfortable giving the answer and women are more comfortable talking it over. So let's talk about a practical way that this plays out in our personal lives.
So how about if we talk about a typical, because we hear this all the time, a typical couple argument at the end of the day. Tammy, would you play the man?
You bet.
Okay. How was your day?
Fine.
What'd you do?
Not much.
Well, you must have done something.
Acme meeting.
Well, what happened at the Acme meeting?
Not much.
Well, now, does this sound familiar to anybody? Now, let's look at what's going on here. He feels interrogated. Now, to give you an example of how this plays out, I was talking to a fellow at a workshop, and he told me that he's dating this woman, and he calls her when he gets home from work at the end of the day. And she asks him, tell me something new. Now, he told me that he feels interrogated at the end of the day. Now, I told him, she's not trying to interrogate you. She's just trying to get a little connection action going on here. But this is the typical kind of problem that these differences cause for us. Now, how does this play out at work, Tammy?
Yeah, this can play out in a myriad of ways inside of organizations. So let me build it with a story. I work inside of our organization, and I head up a project team. And my project team has just kind of gotten stuck. They're not making good progress. I'm not really sure why. And so I decide to go into my colleague Fred's office to talk to Fred. And when I go into Fred's office, I say to Fred, Fred, you know I'm running that project team, kind of stuck, not making any progress. What do you think I ought to do? If he's a typical man, he'll tell me do X. And I'll say thank you very much. And I leave Fred's office and I go into Tom's office and I go into Mary's office and then I go into Brandon's office. And I really like what Brandon suggested. And I decide to do that. And then Fred hears about it. And Fred says, then why did you ask me in the first place? Now I have lost an ally with Fred and I have no idea why. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. When I went into Fred's office, Fred heard me say, please kill my problem. And being the good colleague that he is, he did. But I wasn't intending to ask for him to kill my problem. I was intending to ask for problem discussion, to talk it over. But this is one of those classic examples that if we don't understand the rules of the other culture, we can often become very frustrated and misjudge the other culture. Now let's talk about a story about when this has played out in a real life Fortune 500 company.
Sure. I was doing some work in a company's over 100 years old. And in 100 years, they had never had a woman on the executive team. And this was pretty significant because these people sell children's products. And in fact, they sell them all over the world. And I would say probably the vast majority of children in the world have had this product. And the president, the CEO of the company, had made a commitment to the board of directors that he was going to have 4 women on the executive team in the next 5 years. So I was hanging out at the corporate offices one day, and this fellow named Tom came up to me, and he said, I got to talk to you. He said, I've got a problem. He said, I have a woman who runs one of my plants. And he said, you know, she's really great. He said her numbers are great, her plant is great, but she can't solve any of her own problems. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, she comes to me, and she's always giving me problems. I said, well, what do you do? He says, I give her answers. I said, well, does she want answers? He said, well, I don't know. I said, well, does she do what you say? He said, no, she doesn't do what I say. Well, I said, Tom, When she comes to you with problems, she's coming to you to process through options. I said, really? I said, yeah. I see. So when she comes to you with problems, don't give her answers. Just talk with her about what's going on. Now, bless his heart, that's what he did. He ended up promoting her, and she was successful, but he didn't realize that what she was doing in coming to him with problems was not that she couldn't solve her own problems. But that's what he perceived initially, is that her request for process was, he thought it was that she couldn't solve her own problems. And that's what we do all the time, is we misread the other gender.
And this is a classic example. When we look through the lens of our own gender culture, we can often misread and misjudge the other gender culture if we don't understand how both gender cultures work differently.